So just a blurb from the Undam the Klamath website, which states, the Undam the Klamath campaign began as a group of concerned tribal people and local allies mobilized into action by the events leading up to and following the 2002 fish kill on the Klamath River. Members from the Kuduk, Yurok, Klamath, and Hupa tribes, as well as non-tribal community members from the headwaters to the mouth, met along the river bar and began the conversation that would later lead to action around the world. What we learned at that meeting was no matter who you were or what your background, from native to farmer to commercial fisherman, we all relied on the Klamath for our way of life, and we needed to take action to protect the river. As we continued talking and sharing our stories as members from the Klamath River Basin, we found at the heart of all of our communities was the idea that it is our responsibility to improve the quality of the river for future generations. And the movement was born. So what is the relevance of this Klamath River restoration movement to social work practitioners, developing social change agents, and the Apah Village revitalization journey? The connection between the health of the Klamath River and the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health of the Klamath River people is not obvious to many Americans. But on the Klamath, it is an essential part of the restoration story. What has been done to people has also been done to the river, and the reverberations of colonization are evident in the Klamath's dramatic salmon declines, deteriorating water quality, and in the diet and health of the people who depend on both. Working to restore balance to a people's and a natural world that has suffered multi-generational trauma and subsequent devastation over time involves a collective social movement and commitment to decolonization by those who are most impacted. Groups like the Klamath Justice Coalition, which is an alliance of tribal members, local river activists, and others who use film, grassroots action, and media outreach to advocate for the restoration of the Klamath River, are model change agents at the core, dedicating themselves to ensure that the cultures and ecosystems of Klamath communities are protected and revitalized. So let's assist and align with this movement today by becoming more informed and aware about this human being issue and listen to this evolving journey of decolonization. With that, I would like to introduce two people who I not only love like family, but who I look up to very much for their leadership, commitment, and advocacy in the restoration of balance for our people and our world. Frankie Jo Myers is a Yurok tribal member, traditional dancer, singer, Yurok language learner and speaker, fisherman, Klamath River activist, father, and all-around leader and role model. His wife, Molly Myers, is a Kuduk tribal member, traditional basket weaver, tradition bearer, Klamath River activist, mother, and all-around leader and role model. And today I welcome them with my whole heart to provide us some education and information about this journey that they've been on, probably since before they were even born. So thank you both.
So in a minute here, we're going to play a portion of a movie that we were involved with that kind of goes over the Klamath River agreements. We're going to play the portion that kind of goes into the history of it, the history of the river, as far as it pertains to natives and non-natives in the region. It's pretty cool. We like most of it. We're not going to watch all of it. It's long. But we are going to watch the first part, which is like, we feel like the most interesting stuff about the whole thing. And one of the things that we want to talk to you before we got going, before we started watching the movie, we wanted you to understand, and you'll see this when you go to the Interpretive Center and then when you go to APA, is that there is a difference between what we show the average person and what is kind of the true being of who we are. And it's a very conscious decision, it's a very conscious decision that we made to allow certain aspects to be known in order to tell our story. In this movie, one of the things that you'll notice right off the bat, and is a good example of kind of carries through the rest of the movie, the lady who starts out in the kind of the very, very beginning of the movie is singing a traditional Yurok song. But we have edited it to make it have a more contemporary kind of Pan-American sound to it. It was, go ahead.
So when we get involved in a project like this movie, we've been involved in a few of them. It's a, like Frankie was saying, it's a conscious decision that we make to put ourselves sort of out there in a way that's going to appeal to sort of like the masses, because it's in order for us to be heard, we understand that part of that sometimes is, speaking in a voice that can be understood by more people and sort of appeals to more people. And it's a decision that we don't take lightly. We understand very much that sometimes it comes across as maybe not how we would have done it ourselves, but through the years of many years of doing this, since we were teenagers when we started this battle on the river, we've learned sort of different methods of being heard louder into a more broad audience, which in our experience is sometimes the route that we have to take to get our story out, which in turn makes a difference for us and for our people who we ultimately are representing and kind of serving our people, our children, our parents, and our ancestors, that we feel really responsible to. So we'll start the movie, and it kind of gives the background. What this movie does is it kind of has a background on sort of the degradation of the river, really, how we kind of came to be where we are now. And then after it's done, we'll talk a little bit more about where we are now and how we got to where we are and how we feel like where we feel like the connection between the river and our people really matters. So.
Yeah, we can recruit somebody to hit the lights in the back.
Unless you want.
Klamath is one of the great rivers of the world. It's still wild in most respects. Obviously, we've injured it where we put in dams and oversubscribed its water use. But I think it has the potential to be recovered, to be rehabilitated, to be once again the great river that it was.
It is one of this nation's great treasures. It's a treasure like our national parks are a treasure. It's a treasure like our Constitution, like the way we aspire to live and be as a country.
Americans should feel ownership of the Klamath River. We want you to. We want you to feel the same way we do, that it's a part of you and it's a part of America. It's worth saving.
Teddy Roosevelt probably said it best. These places, these rivers belong to all of us. They're great jewels in the crown of California, Oregon, of the United States. And we all have a stake in what happens to them and the future of those rivers.
What you're seeing is the very best of American democracy, where the Native Americans are getting together with the farmers, getting together with the fishermen, and creating a genuine dialogue. That's a model that has an infinite amount of application to different situations in this country.
I knew what was going on down in the Klamath Basin, and it was very divisive. It's basically so many demands on a finite resource. And so what you want to do is say, I can actually resolve the human side of this, to getting opposing groups together and the politics around it. But what you're really trying to do is to give rebirth to the river.
Like so many rivers in our country, the Klamath River looks healthy, but it isn't. It's been used to the limits for the last 100 years, resulting in crisis after crisis for the people who live here.
To some extent, it's further west. I mean, the Orleans is one of the Bureau of Reclamation projects, which on one hand brought huge economic benefits to the nation and provided water for Indian agriculture, but times changed and other values were there. So wildlife refuges were established and hydroelectric dams. And they don't did anything wrong. It's that these decisions all made sense at the time that they were made. But the problem is they over-allocated the basin and created these bitter disputes.
They were not here. Neither were the co-hosts. What I'm trying to say is,
Anybody who's been seriously involved in water issues in this basin has, for example, received death threats.
The water's been overpromised by the federal government for years and years and years. And so you have all these competing interests that fought forever.
It's neighbor against neighbor that really breaks my heart. I think that maybe with the water shortage, we have a lot of white tape we have to go through. Somewhere is red tape. We say it's white tape.
It's one of the largest rivers in the western United States, and yet the Klamath is barely known, even by the people who live in the 2 states where it flows. It's hundreds of miles from state capitals and well over a day's drive from big cities. It is home to very independent people. Farm and ranch families have now been here for generations, and 5 unique tribes since time immemorial. The Klamath River is ground zero to one of the most intense debates surrounding conservation, agriculture, and river restoration in our country. Reduced snow in the mountains have caused severe droughts, putting ways of life at risk. providing stability and restoring the Klamath is essential, and the people along the river know that. With little help from their representatives, citizen leaders are crafting what could be the most significant restoration project in history, in a way that could bring people together who've been opposed to one another for generations. By doing so, they're creating a model for restoration efforts around the world. I love this place. I was raised here, trout fishing at headwaters, chasing salmon at the mouth, and right here at the home ripple, where my father and grandfather taught me to cast flies for steelhead, like I'm teaching my boy now. My idol was my grandfather, Big Tom. He and his dad were here for the birth of fly fishing for steelhead, and back then the Klamath was stacked with fish. Now we steelhead all day, and we're happy for just a few grabs. I grew up being told it was my job to fix our river, and that was a priority of mine for the 14 years I served in the Oregon legislature. That's my son. I call him Pomp, and he's been taught to judge all other fish by how they compare to the Klamath steelhead. When Pomp was 5, I took him out of school to stand next to 2 governors who would sign a pair of agreements called the KBRA and the KHSA, allowing California and Oregon to take action on the Klamath.
And to say hasta la vista to the dams on the Klamath River.
State Senator Jason Atkinson, whose vision of a free-flowing Klamath River helped inspire these 2 agreements. Jason, thank you very, very much.
42 different organizations compromised: tribes, ranchers, farmers, a power company, and local leaders from the entire length of the river. That day we achieved something most people frustrated with politics think is impossible. After signing, we sent the agreement on to Washington, D.C., where it has stalled, a political football in the hands of partisan people bent on control, whether from the environmental left or the political right. And while they toss it around, the people in my steelhead suffer. Neighbors are at odds with one another. Not everyone agrees with the need to restore the river, or that there's even a problem, but all agree that the federal government has failed. So I'm taking a break from partisan politics and have gone back to visit my friends on this river, people who depend on it. These people are risking their reputations and livelihoods to learn about their neighbors, to find compromise, to restore the Klamath. In a very divided country, what they're showing us is refreshing. If you first heal the people, they'll heal the river. At Mid-River, living among the ranchers and tribes, is an old friend of mine, Bill Roberts. Bill knows these mountains and the people who live here. For 40 years, he has packed mules in the Marble Mountains on the Pacific Crest Trail and contemplates life in this place. When it comes to the fights like we have on the Klamath, Bill doesn't want to take sides between friends. He takes the long view.
What's wisdom? Well, wisdom is being older than 25. It's seeing the big picture. And if you're around one place long enough, you see the big picture. And if you're here and there and here and there, you'll see what you see that day, and you won't see the big picture, whether it's little kids growing up to have little kids to grow up, to have little kids to grow up, or whether it's the mountains or the woods or the river or whatever. In the early days, not long ago, when the Indians peopled the land, beneath a sky of blue, the river ran through on its way to the salt sea sand. Beaver Valley, the trappers called it, took 3,000 pelts the first year. Then the miners came and the army too. That's when the fort was here. A trail was built to the ocean to bring in food, supplies, and tools. From the coastal shore to the Scott Valley floor, they brought it all in with the mules. miles of mountains, canvas and leather, horses and mules and an eye on the weather. The ranchers raise cattle and horses and hay and hogs and sheep and cows milk each day. There's meat at your table and milk in your glass from them drinking the water, eating the grass. Mules pack the salt to the cows in the hills and all of the crews that work on the trails. So the cowboys and packers in the good days of old, when the mules all wore diamonds while packing the gold. The summer sky is still a clear blue, and the river still runs to the sea. And mules are still packed in those mountains so high, and there's still a few packers like me.
If you're going to understand the Klamath, you're going to put in some miles, a lot of miles. It covers an area larger than New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Connecticut combined. The upper basin in Oregon, surrounding Klamath Falls, is home to cattle ranchers and farmers, and is still home to its indigenous people, the Klamath tribes, and a town called Chiloquin. Siskiyou County, California, is larger than 4 eastern states and straddles the divide of the upper and lower river. It's home to the farming community in Tule Lake. The Karuk and Hupa live near Orleans, California, near where the Trinity River meets the Klamath. The Yurok tribal home is Requa on the Pacific coast among the redwoods. These people, the tribes, the farmers, the ranchers, the small communities, all depend on the water from this enormous river. And to restore it, they will need to undo a century of bad blood and old history. To understand that history and how it affects people today, you have to start in 1849 when the miners came. They found gold, but also found what was the 3rd largest salmon run on the West Coast. The river ran thick with fish, native salmon, steelhead, schwalm, trout, sturgeon, and eels. Most of us only see fish in the grocery store, and it's near impossible to imagine how many fish there once were in the Klamath. For thousands of years, the tribes built their lives around an abundance of these fish and wildlife along the river. In the late 1800s, the role of the federal government was focused on taming native tribes and protecting settlers as they expanded our country into the region. Development along the river started in the early 1900s, farms and ranches in the upper basin, gold mining at Mid-River, and logging from Mid-River to the Pacific. In 1905, the federal government created the Klamath Project, draining marshes to create fertile farmland. Rivers were diverted, canals were dug, and agricultural runoff polluted the already phosphorus-rich water flowing out of Klamath Lake. To protect the remaining wetlands, in 1908, President Theodore Roosevelt established the Klamath Wildlife Refuge. Over 80% of all migratory birds in the West fly past the refuge. Following World Wars I and II, veterans were given homesteads in the Klamath Project by lottery and promised an endless supply of water for their new farms. Mining interests have been in the Mid-River since the gold rush in 1849. Prospectors came to Siskiyou County and never left. Gold has been mined there until just recently. During the World Wars, ore for munitions was mined in the mountains. Water cannons melted whole hillsides into the river, destroying fish habitat. Where there are trees, there is a timber industry, and the mountains surrounding the Klamath were loaded. Trees were harvested by the easiest means possible, which means entire forests were cleared. Soil from these clearings slid into the streams. Salmon and steelhead can't spawn in mud. Before anyone points fingers at our great-grandparents, reality is they didn't know the ultimate damage that they were doing to the river. They were focused on building a country. From 1922 to 1962, 4 hydroelectric dams were built in the river, cutting off migrating fish from 300 miles of habitat. Where there was once a flowing river, now there are stagnant lakes, producing warm and unhealthy water for the river downstream. Complicating the story is a cultural phenomenon in Siskiyou County. It starts all the way back in World War I and World War II. Growing frustration with distant, non-responsive state governments and blatant profiteering at the expense of river residents resulted in a movement to create a new state called the state of Jefferson. And it was nearly successful in 1941, but was stalled when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. The culture of the state of Jefferson is alive and well to this day. This enormous county and its fiercely independent citizens represent the majority of the remaining opposition to the restoration of the Klamath River. In the 1950s, the Klamath tribes lost, for pennies on the dollar, their timber-rich reservation. The federal government terminated their nation in a last-ditch effort to assimilate Klamath Indians into American society. Like poor people who win the lottery, tribal members blew through the cash, while the new owners of the forest harvested the trees and made millions. 1973 represents a dramatic shift in the way Americans saw the environment. President Richard Nixon led the passage of the Endangered Species Act, and proponents of the environment were given new legal muscle to protect species. The first effect in the basin of the new law was the federal government attempting to shut down the Yurok tribes gill netting the salmon.
We had to go ahead and put a net out at least every night, some sort of in defiance and exercise our sovereignty.
So they closed the river to Indian fishing. The federal government did to protect the resource. But we're the only ones who weren't allowed to fish. The ocean sport and sport fishery were full blown, and the in-river sport fishing as well.
We actually fought them on the river, hand sometimes. Clubs, whatever, fish clubs against batons.
They had bulletproof vests, helmets with the visor, M16s, and they were in large power boats, and they were there to save the salmon.
We had Wounded Knee veterans that have 1973 that came to help. I'm a Wounded Knee veteran, 1973. So we would disable the U.S. enforcement officers' boats by putting rope or gill net up to their props and their jet pumps.
Where did they get it?
Where did I get it? Well, we defeated them. So we reestablished our rights to gill net.
In the 1980s, forests along the river were closed to the timber industry to save an endangered owl. Loggers lost their jobs, protesters chained themselves to trees, and lawsuits swarmed. The environmental battle lines were drawn. You're either 100% on one side or you're 100% on the other. People who could once agree on environmental stewardship were now arch enemies. The whole system fell apart in 2001 when, in a low snow year, to save an endangered suckerfish in Klamath Lake, the federal government shut off the water to the farmers and ranchers in the project. This touched off a brush fire called the Bucket Brigade.
Meant that there was not enough water. Somebody deemed, a biological opinion, deemed there was not enough water for farmers.
There are no farms. Without farms, there are no farmers. And without farmers, there's no food.
50 buckets, each with the state's name on it, and people dipped it in the river and passed it and dumped it in. Just
While the sympathy of the American public was with the farmers, on the ground, the reality was far worse than people knew.
That was truly a bankrupt year for a lot of people. There were suicides, there were bankruptcies, and the basin has not been the same since.
Kids moved away. The next generation of farmers left because it seemed like this was somewhat of a hopeless, there was a nail in the coffin and there isn't many hope left to put in it.
It was a big deal. And if you look where we're at today, I mean, you can trace it right back to that day.
2 centuries of settlers were devastating to the tribes throughout America and those along the Klamath River. History for these people dates to time immemorial, literally thousands of years. Their history, their religion, their way of life, all centered around their connection to this place and to their traditional ways of providing. Understanding the Native people, how they've been treated, and how the water or lack of water affects them is essential to healing this river. Native life on the Lower Klamath literally revolves around the fall salmon harvest. I visited the town of Requa to witness it. Among the first people I met were 2 sisters, fishing their family's ancient fishing spot. To my surprise, one of the sisters is an environmental justice attorney from Ashland, Oregon, and she was raised fully Yurok.
See that hill right there and that house right there? That's my grandma's house now, but my great-great-grandfather built that house. And right on Cat Rock right here are our great-great-great-grandfather's initials, because that's one of our family fishing holes right there. My dad always says is that these fish, we've been fishing these exact fish for ever since Yurok people were here. And so, you know, they have our DNA, we have their DNA. That's the way of saying that. Our family has been here forever.
It didn't take Amy long to start in on the need for justice on the river.
We've got treaty rights, executive order rights that say we have enough water to support this fishery, yet we never get that. You know, in my opinion, everybody wants to eat salmon, right? Everybody wants salmon, and this is where it comes from. If we don't have water, we don't have salmon.
The water Amy is floating on is warmer these days, polluted from the lakes behind the dams. A healthy salmon run depends on cold, clean water from the whole system. Today, the Yurok are catching fewer fish than they have in generations.
We are an Aboriginal people. We have Aboriginal territory. We have Aboriginal rights. Importantly, to the Klamath River, that is our Aboriginal territory. We have always been in and living on the banks of the Klamath River.
For your people, we view that as a responsibility. So it's not good enough just to be a user of the resource and depend on the resource. We've got a responsibility to protect and restore the resource as well. That goes hand in hand with being blessed by the Creator with the location we're at, and with the bountiful natural resources that your people were given from the beginning of time.
The fishery is so important to us and to who we are as a people, to our spiritual well-being, to, you know, our the health of our health.
The Creator made, you know, all the land and the water and the animals, and then they made the people and said, this is all here for you. These resources will provide for you, but you have the obligation of ensuring that you don't take too much so that they can continue to live.
I know. 2002 was another severe drought year. After the farmers' water was shut off the previous year, the Secretary of the Interior made sure the farmers got the water they needed. Reduced water flows from the Klamath and Trinity rivers left the salmon to die in the warm estuary.
I was just thinking about the fish kill, how that made us feel as a people. Seeing that many fish. I mean, if you think 20 miles and you think 80,000 fish, that's a lot of fish.
There was really nothing we could do. You know, it was so heartbreaking to see this and to know that this disaster was entirely man-made. And because it was entirely man-made, it was entirely preventable. I always say that it was a form of ecocide. or eco-genocide, really, which is a way of saying you kill the resource, the natural resource that a group of people so heavily relies on for their survival, such that it's almost waging a war against those people. Does that make sense? The thing I always compare it to is the buffalo slaughters of the 1800s in the plains. You know, that was a time where you had the Sioux people who relied on the buffalo hunts. That's what they did. They were buffalo hunters, and everything about their life revolved around the buffalo hunt. That's why they were nomadic. When you killed the buffalo, the Sioux people had nothing that they could live on. They couldn't do it anymore. They couldn't be buffalo hunters. So they had to be confined to a reservation. They had to start, farming. They had to figure out other ways to feed their families. And so here we were in 2002, and we are having like the same thing over again, where if that resource goes away, we are no longer Yurok.
Every tribe, from the mouth in California to the headwaters 300 miles away in Oregon, and in fact, tribes across America share a story of this nature: loss, injustice, indifference.
These are people that negotiated in good faith with the federal government, and we blew them off. This is a people in the Klamath region that had a reservation that was taken away. They were a recognized tribe, and that tribal recognition is taken away. So we have to do something about that. It's not okay. And they're not looking to go back to where they were. They're looking to go forward.
The community that I live in, I will very candidly say, we have 150 years of that baggage that we got to deal with. And it's the relationships that we have with the people that were settlers coming in and the indigenous people that were here. And then you can just take that and you can take it down to the Scott and the Shasta, and you look at the relationships that people potentially have here. And you can go clear to the coast. They've had their culture out. What do you do about that? And I think there were generations where folks decided, well, we need to act like white folks because the time of the Indians over. There was some of that. There was policies that came and took people's children and sent them to boarding schools where they were punished, corporal punishment for speaking their language. Ceremonies were practiced at night to avoid fish and game wardens showing up and confiscating fish and deer.
My mom went to boarding school, like my grandfather did. They were fluent. They knew this world inside and out. The two generations that was stripped completely away. I was born into a world of poverty, with my traditional knowledge stripped to the bone. I woke up in a society that looked down upon me and beat me down because I didn't have the right clothes, I didn't talk the same way, and I didn't act the same way.
I've just seen it. I mean, I think there's clearly some racism that goes on, and I don't like talking about it, to be honest with you. It is uncomfortable, and I think that's part of the problem. I mean, I think more people probably should talk about it.
I work in federal Indian law, so I work with brown people all of the time. And there are lawyers who work in my profession who don't believe in racism. They think that racism is just another word for having some kind of bias or disliking somebody. But I think to deny that racism exists in the context of relations between Native Americans and white people is to deny a fundamental issue that exists that we need to address it and acknowledge, even if you just acknowledge it, and then move on.
The focus of conflict on the Klamath today are the 4 main dams in the hydroelectric project. Like thousands of dams across the country, the practical life of these dams is nearing the end. For many in the agricultural communities, the dams represent security for their way of life, and they're opposed to their removal. For the tribes, it's simple. The dams are obsolete, and it's time to reclaim ancient spawning grounds upriver, fortifying salmon runs for future generations.
What the dams create is consistent problems, not only impeding fish passage up and down the river, or blocking fish passage for that matter too. Habitat that would actually be helpful. But it also, they affect water quality and rearing habitat for the fish that do make it up to spawn.
Dams put in between 1917 and 1964. It was our run of salmon that were depleted. It was the Klamath tribes, salmon and other native people in the basins fishery. And much of our reservation, 80%, was without electricity or power, while 4 dams made power, generating power in the Klamath River.
Dams have a reputation of having clean energy and doing all these great things and being, you know, good for agriculture. And in fact, these dams, they don't do any of that. These dams are useless. They're old, they're useless, and used as sort of an idea of something more so than actually meaning for something.
It represented the Upper Basin irrigators securing the dams we're in. It is the way it is, the way it was before, and they can continue on the way they've always continued on, taking as much as they wanted.
Every year, late in the summer, the river runs low and warm. The lakes behind the dams turn bright green with algae, and county health departments tell people to stay out of the river.
The dams themselves right now, they take nitrogen from the air through the algae that grow in them. And so they are like pollution machines.
Talk about water quality. Most dams, when they're taken out, it's clean, clear water above them. This isn't clean, clear water that's up there. This is nasty water.
Do they hurt fish? Yes. I mean, do they make water temperature higher? Yes. Do they have bacteria behind them? Yes.
It's been known since 2005 that they're well over World Health Organization standards for toxic algae, Microcystis aeruginosa. It'll kill your dog, it'll dissolve your liver.
We get notices starting usually in September, but as it turns out, it coincides with our well renewal ceremony. The exact same time that we need to be in the river is the time that we get the notice to say that we can. That's the part that I think people don't understand. You talk to people, they say, well, look at the river in November, look at it in December, it's fine. We don't need to be in it in November and December. We need to be in it in September and August and October. That's when we can't be in it.
Though the dams are the focus of the debate on the Klamath today, they're just a piece of a longer struggle over who gets how much water. It's a war that intensified in courtrooms and on street corners for 2 decades.
The debate up here is over what has been a free resource for a long time, water. The fact is, there's too many people that want too little water.
We took some large land that no individual with common sense would have created a farm on. And we created agricultural interests in that land.
The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals determined that the tribes did have a priority water right, time immemorial water right.
The bottom line would be the tribes would come out first, and then you would have to get what was left.
They are in the Lost River Basin, and they are being dried up systematically on purpose in violation of the ESA.
We've been doing this for so long, and we've been on opposite ends of things, and every time you win one, you lose another.
And we're in a situation here where we don't have carryover storage for irrigation.
And there's always the perception begins wars. And then the stronger you become and what you feel the water is for, then the stronger the hate, and then the wars begin. And then comes the idea of not listening to them. And I think that's where
Okay, so there's more, but that's where we're gonna stop it. So that's kind of background, right, on where, sort of how we got involved was, you know, right before the fish kill, when the Buffy Brigade happened and all that, like, we saw it coming. Like, we saw